Hi, my name is Arati and I'm a journalist at MediaNama. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the research presentations for the 2022 cohort of the Meta India Tech Scholars. Meta launched the program to provide a research and mentorship platform to law students who are keen to engage on contemporary questions of technology, law, and policy. The law firm Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas Co is supporting the program as a knowledge partner. Through this series, the scholars will show us how specific policy choices in the technology sector influence and impact India's tryst with the internet. For today's showcase, I'm delighted to introduce you to Yashashwini. Yashashwini is a final year law student at the NALSAR University of Law in Hyderabad. In her paper, she delves into the intricate overlap between personal data protection and platform governance principles, focusing on the increasing use of artificial intelligence. She approaches this from a comparative standpoint and explores the dynamic between personal data rights and community based data rights. Her work experience spans internships with independent counsel, research contributions, and active involvement in co curricular activities. Super happy to have you here, Yashashwini, and I will be handing it over for you to start.
Thank you so much. Second. Right. Hi. So, my paper is, as you can read, is largely focused on content moderation and the use of AI in content moderation and all the issues that accrue um, with respect to such content moderation. I think the motivation behind my paper was the fact that there is lack of empirical substantiation or even comprehensive directives for any sort of ethical content moderation. Content moderation, as we know, lies at the very heart of the very use of social media websites, of the use of the internet per se. But what I focused on in the paper is social media websites, specifically Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and how their approach has changed over time, or how their approaches and the changes that they've brought in have made any sort of difference to things that we understand as of now. So in the paper, I have largely looked at the lack of transparency or equitable treatment, or like say content policy implementation and any sort of changes. I'll take you through everything to demonstrate the kind of requirements that we may have, or the social media platforms may have, to enhance the experience for the user per se. So largely, I start my paper discussing the very question of legitimacy, the question of perception of users, of how platform governance per se is also affected by how how a user, how an outsider looks at a platform and how he legitimizes it. For example, the legitimacy of a platform is only brought through the perception that any sort of user has towards it. If I think, for example, if I think Twitter is legitimate, if Twitter is a good platform where I can perhaps have any sort of perhaps have freedom of expression or freedom of speech in a way that it is not hindered by some sort of opaque content moderation policy or other ethical guideline, then the legitimacy for the platform increases. And in such a manner, the policies and all the procedures that any platform carries out, they increase or decrease the legitimacy of the platform per se. This is all affected by the procedures, including content moderation, including the use of the AI in the content moderation process that they have now adopted. Largely, when we look at anything related to the AI or anything algorithmic that is used by large tech companies, that is used by even smaller tech companies, but in terms of its impact, we look at scale and we look at why such a use of the AI is also required. Largely, there are challenges posed because of the scale for companies like Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or any sort of social media platform that we use at a global scale, because it's not solely about the size, but also the potential for small elements and the different impacts that it may yield in terms of content moderation per se. Because while some speech may be flagged as violent, or while some speech may be flagged as anything that is within the policy that needs to be removed, it may not actually be so because of its different characteristic, because of different language use, because of the context. But the use of AI sort of flattens all this, but also helps us conquer the issues of scale, in that now more posts can be viewed, or more things that have been flagged can be properly moderated within a few hours or a few days without further delay. The positive impact of this is the fact that yes, your any sort of complaint that you may have made with the platform will be looked at sooner. But the challenge with that comes with such sort of automation is that it also leaves out the instances, or flattens it such that instances where there may not be any fault, where content may not be violent or violative of the policy that of the platform, it may be flagged so. And that's why, while it helps in such a way, it is also a problem, the scale, largely. Secondly, when we look at just the use of AI in content moderation, and this is just the background to all the information that we largely interrogate or look at in the case studies, we see that AI and user generated data is very helpful, because while we look at something like scale, the factor of scale comes in, and the factor of all the user generated data are like a twofold thing that we look at specifically when we look at what the AI can go through. AI is not something that is programmed only for, say, text data, or textual data, or only for pictures, or only for videos. It can be it pans across the board and can be used for various kinds of content, which is why it becomes so easy and it becomes so familiar, and we sort of start over depending on it, because its use makes everyone's work easier. But again, as we noticed with the use, with our understanding of scale, it is the fact that while it's looking at all this kind of content, and while it's providing a solution by moderating it sooner and quickly, it removes the element of human judgment, or it sort of decreases the element of human judgment, which takes away from what content moderation can actually do for a platform, or how content moderation can be made better for the user, hence making it sort of worse, which will ultimately in the long run affect the platform. Largely, the issues then that we look at, or the challenges then that we look at in a holistic manner that AI poses, or the use of AI poses, are threefold here, or as I've seen. They are in terms of decisional transparency, justice, and effective policy, effect on politics, such that in the first manner, it AI has usually been regarded as a black box or any sort of algorithmic use, because even if it has been made public, its use or its understanding is very minimal to the larger public, to anyone like you and me who do not understand the codes that well. Secondly, to justice, which is sort of linked to the first point, because decisional transparency becomes something that is only held by the platform, or held by the technicians behind the platform. The way it works, the way the AI is making its decision, is also something that is handled completely by the AI, and therefore their decision in terms of what to flag, what to take down, what not to take down, what kind of data should be moderated in what way, sort of has a direct impact on justice, one that we may not be able to, or even the platform may not be able to see or justify in the long run. Similarly, in terms of effect on politics, algorithms run everything when it comes to content moderation if the platform gives it that sort of importance. The way it can have an impact on this politics is this any sort of AI or any sort of algorithm can flag certain kinds of words, certain kinds of images, certain kinds of data, depending on the platform it is on, and then flag that or propagate that while not flagging or not considering something else violative, which may in fact be violative. Therefore, these three things are the larger challenges that are posed by AI. Further, in my paper, I've looked at three things, three case studies. Like I said, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Facebook, which has become Meta now, has a very specific moderation policy in that they do use AI, and AI plays a really critical role in trying to remove harmful or violative content and to make it sooner, to give an easier or provide a much more enhanced experience for the user. But the platform faces challenges in achieving this because there is no perfect balance, or even if there is a perfect balance, achieving it becomes sort of an ideal situation, which may or may not be possible. The concerns that come up then are that Facebook's policy largely lays out the fact that there will be some sort of moderation by AI, and there will be other human moderation, as do all companies. What differs with most companies or with most companies' policies is the fact that of degree, the degree of involvement of AI or the degree of involvement of human moderators. Here, especially with Facebook, the problem that has been noticed is the fact that there has been deployment, or there has to be deployment of third-party entities or any sort of corporate structures to manage the very AI-driven content moderation tools. What happens then is the fact that users or people like you or me or any sort of policy people, when you look at this kind of involvement of third-party entities, there may be gaps in terms of what kind of data they can take, what kind of data they can store and use, or what kind of liability then accrues to the third party or any sort of corporate structure which has been employed by Meta themselves. So that becomes a larger issue, that becomes an ethical concern, a legal concern, with nitty-gritties which may not have been read by the user, because as users, you and I will never read, or will largely not decide to read all the terms and conditions for things where we're consenting for data to be given. Similarly, data has always been asked, consent has always been asked for, even when we're filing perhaps a complaint for flagging down something or for flagging down another person's post. What happens then is the fact that data may be misused. Content moderation may become something which is going one step further and not just affecting the post that has been put up, but even other data and the user in a much more larger sense, which is what makes the moderation policy slightly ineffective, but not, not ineffective, but slightly faulty, such that it can be made better or it can be balanced better if there is perhaps more involvement of human judgment at a later stage, or maybe have a 2 to 3 stage process instead of having just a 1 or 2 stage process with the complete elimination or lesser involvement of third party entities per se. Secondly, when looking at Twitter's moderation policy, it has been understood that there has definitely been algorithmic bias when looking at Twitter's moderation policy, largely in the context of COVID-19, because it was a topic that was brought up largely or talked about largely on Twitter. There was a lot of misinformation with respect to any sort of data that was there. Then there has always been claims of misinformation, or there have been claims of facts that are just incorrect being put on the platform, even with respect to politics, when it came to election related content for America in 2020, or even before or after Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter. The policy that Twitter adopts in face of such political bias or political algorithmic bias in terms of whatever database that has been data set that has been given to the platform itself, is that they try to monitor it and they try to reduce it or put in checks such that certain kinds of data will be flagged, certain kind of additional information will be provided. But with respect to the content moderation policy, largely, what happens is that a lot of there has been a lot of use of data that has been given by the user, by you and me, to the platform for multiple things, for multiple experiments that we may or may not have consented to. How this affects the moderation policy is that while they're moderating only perhaps one tweet or one post that I put out with any sort of media on it, they're also looking at other media, they're also looking at other information that I'm putting in, which may be personal to some extent in terms of what location I'm from, what kind of things that I'm looking at, what is the kind of activity that I have on the platform, or any sort of other rights, which are any sort of other rights related to the data that I'm putting on the platform through my perhaps use of the platform, or just my being on the platform, my existence on the platform, which requires data to be given to it. The kind of issues that this brings up is that users have much lesser agency than your privacy rights are violated. Your experience on the platform is, instead of being enhanced, becomes worse. And that is why this Twitter also requires a larger, perhaps ethical policy in terms of what will be flagged, what cannot be flagged, what kind of data can be taken. Thirdly, looking at YouTube's moderation policy, it becomes increasingly interesting because YouTube brought in, right when COVID-19, around COVID-19, around 2019-20, brought up a very AI heavy system of moderation, in that they would use AI for looking at all the platforms at one level, at perhaps stage one of their content moderation process, and then maybe have another human judgment element to it at stage two. But what this led to was that at stage one, a large number of videos, or a large number of a large amount of content was just removed off the platform, which was something that even the company per se and officers of the company said that does not align with the very agenda of YouTube, or with the very agenda of the social media platform as it was created. And hence they removed the limitations that AI brought with it, that automated moderation would get to the plate if they used it excessively. And hence they highlighted through their understanding of the issue that human judgment is extremely important alongside AI. So while they continue to use AI, they continue to they continue to moderate their content in an automated way. It only becomes a part of the process, and it is delineated in a very specific way, such that stage one will perhaps be removal of content which has words like any sort of tags, or perhaps any sort of use of words in the videos, etc. And then a human judgment element to judge or remove that content will also be added, which shows which shows more concern for the user, and which shows more concern for perhaps enhancing the platform in a way that they think is best for user experience and for the future, which is what makes it better, or which is what makes the platform somehow more amenable to a user than the others. In my study of all these things, of content moderation, of its complexity, of how these guidelines can be made tailor-made, but still perhaps not perform to the extent, or perhaps not perform so well that may be expected by the platform, or that may be expected by the user, which is what remains at the very heart of content moderation. It is a complex process. It is something that has to be taken up by all platforms to enhance their experience. To enhance the user experience, to make the internet somehow what it ought to be, or what they thought it to be while they started these platforms. But while we're doing this, we also have to, at all points, or the user, or the platforms have to at all times keep in mind that there will be a chance of failure, or there will be a chance of perhaps things not achieving the goal that they ought to achieve. In terms of India, in terms of our jurisdiction, and how the platforms work here, when we look at our laws, we see that there is a lack here. We see that we can take inspiration from perhaps, as I've mentioned, other countries, and perhaps have more governmental intervention or power for some sort of governmental intervention in a limited manner, the way that perhaps Germany has, which mandates quick removal of illegal data, or how the EU has, I'm sorry, which aims to structure content moderation and bring in some sort of accountability. What this does is that it gives us an umbrella structure to understand not just content moderation as a complex process, or content moderation as something that makes the use of platforms more easier perhaps, or lucrative, and gives it more legitimacy instead of taking away something that it already has or making the experience worse. But still use AI, still see how the platforms can grow, how the internet can grow, um how our use of the internet can grow and our experience on the internet can grow and be made better instead of being more regressive in any sort of manner. So content moderation, through my paper, largely the way I portray it is something that has to be done in one way or the other. And AI is a manner in which that AI is a manner, or AI is a tool that we should be adopting. Just that the way that we adopt AI is something that we should be informed about instead of perhaps handling it rashly. That's all from my side.
So thank you so much for that, Yashashwini. It was a really interesting exposition on the larger issues that we're facing with content moderation across platforms right now. And we're sort of increasingly seeing that the governments are sort of less forgiving of platform efforts or lack of efforts in this arena as well. So it's good to see you kind of give people the benefit of doubt and actually spell out, what the pros and cons of different approaches are. So I just had a few quick questions based on your findings that I would just be interested to learn a little more about from your end. So one thing that you mentioned was that content moderation really helps users build trust for the platform. And it sort of helps ensure the platform's legitimacy. It helps retain the user as opposed to, shifting to another platform. And I fully buy that to an extent. But from practical experience, we often don't have much of a choice. So, for example, I might not like Instagram or Twitter or YouTube's content moderation practices, but all my friends might be on that platform. So for me to shift off it and go somewhere else has a very high cost. So I might just put up with it, whatever lackluster practice that might be happening, simply for those social reasons or any other reasons. So given that we're in this situation where there's quite a bit of market dominance by a few big social media companies, is content moderation actually like the silver bullet solution that helps with user retention, or is it a combination of other factors as well?
For like my understanding and very experience on these social media platforms as well, it's completely correct that people will, or any sort of user will not just pick up and leave because perhaps the content moderation policy is not up to their standard or not up to their taste. But the way it works is that it sort of has a trickle down effect, in that if the content moderation policy is unsatisfactory, for some days or for some months it may continue, and it may remain unsatisfactory to one person, and then to another, and then to another, and then it moves on to a much larger crowd or a much larger group of people, who then choose to perhaps use another platform, which may also, in a very in layman's term, which may affect or help another perhaps platform to come in then, because the competition reduces, or the competition is in some manner affected by this policy. But if we're looking solely at the policies of the platforms, we can see that they have a direct effect, even though they're maybe perhaps noted in the long run. It's something that directly affects the user experience. So it's something that we should, that the platforms should definitely look at in a at a much larger scale and more intrinsically, so that it does not lead to a long-term issue, or does not lead to a long-term issue that perhaps is disregarded and then becomes another issue.
Understood. Thank you for that. And I think another question I had on that line is what you're essentially speaking to is impacts and effects. And those can often be felt on users who might feel that, certain kinds of speech are being censored unfairly or sometimes by accident, who knows. And I think this is something that governments, especially in India, across have sort of touched upon, which is that content moderation isn't happening properly, and there's a lot of kind of vile stuff floating around online that platforms aren't really doing enough about. So my question is whether you're talking about the question of, especially when you're talking about the question of leaning on AI to improve the content moderation experience at scale, do you see this also impacting issues like safe harbor regulations, which protect platforms from being held liable for this vile speech floating around online? Have you seen the use of AI by companies sort of coinciding with governments talking about changing safe harbor regimes and making platforms more liable? Do you see a connection there at all? Just curious to know your thoughts.
So I think there's definitely a connection in that all these things are directly coming from the platform, from the way they've been created and whatever policy that they have for the user or for the moderation process. So there has to be some sort of, at the moment, the safe harbor policies are such that platforms or intermediaries are just will not be liable in such and such cases. But they may be affected if the growth of AI is really, if the growth of AI is increasing in such a manner that it can't be controlled or can't be even reported to the government that it works in this way or it works in that way. The way that the government, in just my personal opinion, the way that it works the best is by allowing transparency. And the way platforms can allow transparency is by showing how their moderation process is and how they seek for it to be in the future even. So while right now there are the way the regulations are do not affect them, they may affect them in the future even if such sort of transparency is required off of the platforms, which is not required at the moment. So while it's not a direct impact on safe harbor regulations per se, maybe, or even if it's brought in the long run, it's something that will definitely have an impact on the way the platform has been treated by the government at the moment. Because right now they are not regulated at all by the government or regulated in a very loose manner.
Hmm. Understood. And just out of curiosity, how easy is it to like precisely be transparent when you're using AI in such circumstances? Like, is it easy or is it going to be a tough challenge for platforms?
So usually it's not much of a challenge because there are definitely some parts of it that are made public by the platforms. If you go to if you go to the websites of any of these companies or specifically to their AI policy or how much they're using AI, they definitely delineate for you how much they're using AI, to what extent they're using it. The only things that cannot be made public is perhaps the very code that they're using or the specific intricacies of the platform that are intertwined with the use of AI. But what misses out is the fact that their ethical guidelines sometimes are murky. What they so seek to use it for, and then what they seek to use it for publicly, and then use it for in some other manner may vary. So the only way that this can be made transparent is perhaps a dialogue between stakeholders, including the government and the platforms, and then a very like exchange of questions and exchange of where the data goes, what sort of use of AI then becomes necessary for expansion or any sort of increase in terms of enhancing the platform. But that's about it, I think.
All right. Thank you so much for this, Yashashwini. This has been great. If you'd like to read a little more about Yashashwini's work or go through any of the other scholars' presentations or research, please do head over to MediaNama's website or YouTube channel where the full gallery of presentations is available. Thanks a lot, everyone.